Hi, and welcome to The New Mind. Today's guest is Dr. Charlotte Armitage again, because we had a little chat recently about the Bonnie Blue documentary, and it sort of occurred to both of us, but Charlotte's idea, to be fair, that this is a conversation that needs to be had. It's being had in many different ways across social media right now. But one of the things I think that's really important, that it's dissected in a sensible way, not just in a way that's salacious and giving attention to her for all the wrong reasons. We probably need to unpack quite a lot. So, welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, our last episode I feel, did really, really well because it pulls on the fears of society, really, in the way things are going, and this is another episode that's doing the same for me, and for you, for us having daughters, and that, at a time when there's so much for them to cope with already. The fact that this is just another layer, the whole sex industry and the way women are being perceived, but also directly on Bonnie Blue, the way they are putting themselves out there, it's really crossing so many boundaries and creating so many problems, not only for girls but for boys too. That I feel, when you said, shall we do an episode, I thought, do you know what, we absolutely have to, really, don't we? And what I've said is, I know a few people that have had her on their shows, and I don't want to do that. I think it doesn't sit right with me to have her as a guest, because I don't feel like she's really letting anyone go deep into who she is as a person anyway. So I don't want that salacious angle. I want to take it to a different place, and you're the right person to do that. You're so beautifully articulated in the way you speak, and your knowledge of these issues is beyond most people's, I think, anyway. So where do we start, Charlotte?
It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, there's a huge amount to unpack from
Yeah.
that documentary, but it does speak to a much wider societal shift in the way that we are going.
Mm.
Even the fact that Channel 4 made and broadcast this documentary and elements of that documentary, I found that in itself quite shocking, to be honest. It's so, my 12-year-old could have gone into another room and put that on by clicking a "I am over 18" box, and that would have been it, and she'd have been on. So there's a lot to unpack, and I think we can look at it from sort of we can start looking at it, I think, from that perspective of looking at her. And we just said there, she doesn't really let anybody go that deep with her, and I think that's part of it all is that she knows what she's doing in terms of PR. Uh,
Mm.
every conversation is PR and publicity to drive people to a platform. Whether she's got that insight herself or not is questionable. I think maybe her actions would suggest there's a level of emotional detachment there that's going on anyway. But there's a lot for us to talk about in this conversation.
So much. I guess many of us, especially if there's been, and I'm not speaking of her directly here, just to be very, very clear, but many of us, if we go through any form of trauma in childhood, there is a split, and the false self is unconsciously created and presented to the world. And again, to be very clear, I'm not saying that there's been any trauma, or I don't know her background well enough to know if there has been, but it does feel like there's a fantasized version of self, a false self that's been presented, and a character that's been developed. And it reminds me, I don't know if you remember this particular lady, but a very famous porn star, Jenna Jameson, who was probably the most famous female porn star in the world at one point, and she was into producing the show, well, the films as well. And she ended up having a really awful drug habit, and obviously we kind of saw the demise of Jenna Jameson over the years, because the character that she was portraying to the world was obviously not the entirety of who she was. She was fragmented, and you know it's worrying, because when someone's making a lot of money or getting a lot of fame or infamy, when that's happening, I think young girls and boys looking at that suddenly feel like, well, that's a way to get money and fame, and that looks fantastic. She's got all the cars, she's got all of this money, and she's getting lots of attention. But what they can't see is what's inevitably going to happen down the road. So there's lots in terms of the fragmentation of self, the false self, the fantasized self, the narcissist, all these different things that are potentials for anyone that's doing that. But it comes down to as well the long-term effects, not just on society, but on the individual themselves. And I guess, like you said, if there's an emotional numbness or detachment, if she's completely cut off and living in that false self, living in that fantasized version of self, it does then make me question how dangerous she is, because that that putting yourself on a pedestal in that way, in the way that she's chosen to do it, it's really deeply disturbing.
Mm. I think there's quite an unsettling combination of factors which has led to the creation of this person. And, I think it's interesting when we mentioned, you mentioned trauma there, but she talks about having had sex at 13 in the
Mm.
documentary. And that
Mhm.
is, psychosexually too young to
Yeah.
comprehend sex and sexual relationships. Now,
Mhm.
whether you believe that was consensual or not, it is inappropriate. And how you may choose to relate to that experience. So, whether you uh, feel shameful about it or whether you feel proud about it, it still is inappropriate sexual contact. And actually, people who do have sexual contacts at that age, their identities can become quite linked to sex. They can think that their worth is quite linked to sex. And I think that's quite interesting. She talks about, it's almost a little bit of a glimpse into who she is, really. She talks about having had sex at 13, but she talks about watching porn even earlier than that, which I think is also part of this conversation, is that children regularly are now accessing hardcore graphic material at a very young age. And what impact is that then having on their sexual development? And I worry really that Bonnie Blue is maybe a bit of a taste of what's to come, because we have a
Yeah.
lot of young people now who are accessing very serious pornography, explicit on at very, very young ages, even younger than 12, 13. So we know that. So then we live in a society which seems to be defined by this persona that you put online. It takes a lot to break through into shock, which is part of the reason that she's doing these huge, huge stunts, because OnlyFans is flooded with people who don't really want to go work, would rather do a bit of fun and get paid instead of doing it. We even saw that in the documentary of these young girls saying, well, I don't really want to work a 9 to 5, or young women should I say, I don't want to work a 9 to 5. I'd rather do this online. So we're becoming a society of people where actually in the future, how many Bonnie Blues are there going to be? Is it going to become more common, especially as younger women or younger girls are being influenced? They'll be seeing the money she's making, the lifestyle she's got. It all looks really empty and hollow to me, but that's with my professional head on. But to a young person, this may look like something to aspire to.
The problem, and you're right. I think that it's a bit like anything, isn't it? You know, when you go on a diet and then you reach your plateau, and so you need to eat less food. So every single time you get to one particular place, there's more to do, and and with this, it feels like with watching porn so early on, the more you watch, the more you need. It's the same thing. You get to a plateau, you're no longer turned on by those things that you were watching before, or there's no risk element, or there's no dopamine release, or whatever it is, and so you need more of it. And I feel like that's exactly what she's doing, not only from such a young age in terms of watching porn and having sex, but also in the way that she's approaching her career. It's almost like, when's enough? And you know, her mum as well, like her mum is quite heavily involved in her career, and I find that so disturbed. Probably more, to be honest, personally as a mother, I find that more disturbing, if I'm being honest, than what Bonnie Blue is actually doing, because it's kind of like, how on earth can you justify in your head as a parent supporting this level of, quite honestly, depravity, and sort of being the Kris Jenner in that world or it just makes no sense to me. So obviously there's concerns there about her mother's personality traits. So again, we can't say too much because we could get ourselves in trouble here. But ultimately, there's a lot of unhealthy early behaviors, and you do question. And I'm not saying there will be parents out there that are really good parents. I've got to say this, where their children get into the wrong crowd and maybe have sex early on, maybe get access to porn early on. That the fact that that happens to your child doesn't make you a bad parent. How you handle that and how you consistently parent after an event like that has taken place is really, really important in terms of supporting that child with a healthy way of thinking about themselves, but also the world around them. So we know that that network needs to be really cohesive, even if it's not your parents, it's the teachers, it's the systems, whatever. And it feels like Bonnie Blue slipped through the net massively.
You are right. Sexual trauma does lead to usually quite sexually promiscuous behavior, whilst
Yeah.
it still remains unprocessed in the unconscious.
Yeah. I mean, and as you know, and my listeners will know, there is a history for me with childhood sex,
Mm.
rape at 13, rape at 17. So I spoke openly and I used to say this. I used to say, like, I was very sexually promiscuous. And
Mm.
then I realized that it wasn't sexual promiscuity in the way that we talk about sexual promiscuity usually. It was a lack of boundaries. It was a lack of being able to connect to my own body. So
Mm.
the only way that you can connect to your body is to again own the sex, and by being promiscuous and feeling like you've got a choice, you are now owning the sex. It's not something that's being, used to control you. And
Mm.
I feel that you're right in saying that her way of doing it is to convince herself and everybody else that this is her choice. But I feel like there's a hugely fragmented part of her that's just completely zoomed out and completely dissociated.
Yeah, I would agree with you that it does seem that there's a level of dissociation going on there, and I think they do talk about that. I think the somebody in the documentary mentioned some sort of death stare or something like that that she does. That's
Yes.
dissociation, isn't it? But I
Yeah.
mean, you mentioned it a second ago there, and this is what I talk about with quite a an unfortunate and now risky set of circumstances is, she mentions sort of having sex at 13, being exposed to graphic material prior to that. We don't know the circumstances surrounding that sexual experience, but she does talk about going for barely legal men. And I know that that is supposed to be part of the PR campaign and stunt, but she also talks about how your first time can be quite daunting, which does make me then think, is that a reflection of your experience? But like
Projection.
you're saying about, yeah, projection, and like you say about the parents as well, it's really quite shocking, like the lack of appropriate boundaries throughout. That documentary was disturbing on a multitude of different levels, but the lack of boundaries that run through it in terms of her boundaries, in terms of the boundaries of the fact this was even produced, the boundaries of Channel 4, but the boundaries of the parents as well. From a parental perspective, if you don't have, you need that she doesn't have any conflict. There's no conflict in her mind of someone saying, "Do you know what? My mum and dad are going to be really upset if I do this, or they're going to be
Mm.
furious when they find out." So, if there's no conflict, there's no reason for you to stop doing it. And I think with her, it seems that yet the parents supporting this, I suppose you have to question what that's about, because where are these appropriate caregivers that should be surrounding you to guide you and tell you this isn't appropriate? Not only is this quite likely psychologically damaging for her and her future, but physically as well. A
I
thousand
mean,
a day, and it's incredibly risky, dangerous on so many levels. And reputationally, she's got to think, 20 years' time when she's older, wants to have a family. Is this going to bother her? Where does it all end, as you've all said? But where are those voices around her saying, I don't think this is a good idea for you. I don't think this is safe.
this is where it comes to, and I say this so often that I bore myself, but it takes a village to raise a child. Society, community, and I remember this from very early on. I was probably quite a young adult when I heard it. And I remember it must have been on a news show or something like that. And someone said, look, there was some statistic that if a child that was neglected or abused in childhood had just one adult that was loving them, caring for them, showing them that they were enough, that they were loved, that they were safe, that had such an impact in their development as opposed to the child that had no safe adult. And so that really reminds me of the takes a village, or it just takes just one person to step up and say something isn't right here. This child needs my love and attention. And it's one of the reasons I thoroughly enjoy working with young people, because I didn't have that safe person. I had people that cared, so that's not fair to say. But in terms of doctors, counselors, therapists, there was nobody, and so I wasn't getting that mirroring back to say, it's okay, we've got you, we're going to guide you, we're going to support you. I did have people around me, a couple of people, but they were linked to the family, and obviously mine was intrafamilial sex. So I needed more external, the village, to give me that support. So I firmly believe, although I don't know, that in this situation there is something quite toxic within that family system, where perhaps that for whatever reason a lot of this was hidden, and she wasn't getting the external support. Because clearly, if your mum's, I mean, I know she's in her 20s, but she's still a young woman. She's in her, mid 20s now. This has been going on for a couple of years. My daughter is 18 in October. Not in my lifetime, I would do anything not to allow her to follow that kind of path. It would not happen. Not in a million years. So it makes me question what the parents or parent is getting out of this relationship. So again, that there's so many layers to that. And again, I'm imagining that there's some financial reward in the
Well,
same way
they
that
are
there
on
is.
the payroll. They are on the payroll. I think it was covered in the documentary. I think what's interesting as well is the Times covered this, where they wrote, the journalist wrote that there is a part of that documentary where there's a Polaroid of her face covered in semen, and then there are clips of that documentary of the gang, and the father watch, and we do, I am aware that we do need to be careful what we say. Uh, but it's unusual for a father to be able to sit and watch that. Um, absolutely not saying that the father's done anything wrong, but what I'm saying is that the boundaries have been completely blurred between, I suppose, that parental child relationship,
She
what
doesn't have that.
a responsible parent looks like. And it is quite unusual for a biological father to be able to sit and watch their daughter doing something like that. It's not
It's,
do,
it's
okay, cool.
turns my stomach. I mean, obviously it was my dad that sexualized me, so I feel that on every level that is wrong. And do you know what? The reason um I've remembered something, and I don't know if this is true or not true. So again, this is something I've heard at some point. There could be no truth in it, but I'd heard at some point that he wasn't actually a biological father.
Yeah.
Not that that would make it okay, because if he's a stepdad that's raised her from really, really young, then it's still just as bad in my book, because a father isn't just DNA. A father is the parental caregiver. So in my book, it's just as bad either way. But um, I had heard that rumor. And again, I don't know if there's any validity to that. This is the problem
Mm.
with the internet, isn't it? Is that you've got loads of opinions, loads of rumors. I mean, there was a rumor a little while ago that was saying that she had, a sex change. So again, you can't believe what you hear. But on the note of the father, whether he's a biological father or the father that she's known, it's wrong, in my opinion. I find that to be stomach churning. And I think that there is, for her, and she may not feel this if she's dissociated or detached, for her, she has no real parenting, in my opinion. That's just an opinion. So that means, and it sort of leans into that. And again, I'm not calling her a narcissist or I'm not diagnosing, or I can't diagnose even if I wanted to because I'm not qualified to do that. But I see a lot of histrionic personality disorder within that behavior. I see a lot of narcissism within that behavior. And we know then that there's a split in the, I've said it before, the fragmented self, but the idealized self. And I guess my question to you as a fellow professional would be, why do you think that someone would create a fantasized version of self, an idealized version of self? Um, why do you think that happens? I mean, I kind of know, but I'd love to hear your take on it.
Well, I suppose from an unconscious perspective, I think if you are creating, it can be a way of coping with your trauma, can't it?
Hmm.
So actually, you identify with the aggressor, I suppose,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
many ways. In terms of what she's doing, you could argue that some of this is self-harming behavior as well. You know, that level of this is what's quite confusing about this whole situation with her, is that when you watch the documentary, is you don't you know that some of the things she's saying is, this is the PR angle I'm going on, so that's what I'm going to include in the documentary. And then some of it you're sort of like, is there an element of truth that's going on here? Um yeah, I mean, like it was said, it's a difficult one to, as much as we've just got to make sure we don't cross that line of analysing her too much and saying too much about her, because that would be ethically wrong, and professionally wrong. But yeah, you tell me what you think about the false sense of self.
Well, I guess for broadly speaking, not directly about her, but broadly speaking, I suppose, if I was to look at myself, which is a safer way of doing it, I think there would have been definitely the identity with the aggressor and then the internalization. So I would have definitely had that exiled part that was carrying the shame, the guilt, and whatever. Definitely borderline traits early on, for sure. Um, and I suppose the false identity that I would have created would certainly not have been the same as hers, but I'm a very high functioning entrepreneurial woman. And so my identity, I guess, has been formed around that. That split has gone into my work, my persona. And obviously, the job that I do is essentially to support others that have had similar experiences or early childhood traumas. So the way that I've then been able to project a version of myself has been the rescuer, I suppose. You know, if we were going to look at it deeply from a fragmented point itself, but then the exiled part would still be there, um, internalized, and so you'd maybe look somatically at the body and at some of those secret behaviors that most people have. What's different about people like Bonnie Blue, not Bonnie Blue specifically, is that they want the world to see that. And and they want them to see it to a level where they are pushing boundaries beyond, you said the word earlier, it's shock. It's not enough just to be seen. I have to shock. I have to be seen and famous on a level that is, if you just think about fame, forget how you get famous. I find that disturbing. I couldn't and wouldn't want to be famous. I find the whole idea of fame to be deeply disturbing on so many levels. The lack of privacy, the lack of ability to move freely in your own world, um, the lack of ability to even go to a supermarket without being, all of those things, just that natural freedom and space. Then you take it to the level of shock and disgust, which is that's the shock. We are not just by Bonnie Blue, but by these behaviors. We're disgusted by it. We're disgusted by the lack of parenting. Again, not just with her, but with anyone that's in that situation.
You know, it's interesting that you're saying all of that, and as I'm sat there here, I'm listening and I'm thinking, shock, disgust, lack of parenting. It's almost a projective identification, isn't it? So if somebody has, and obviously we're using that analytical term, so I'll explain that just for people listening, but so a lot of people, for example, have normally been, there's usually been sexual assaults in their childhood.
Yeah.
And one theory of people is that they have so much shame from the abuse that they have experienced that they then, as adults, then inflict that shame out onto another child as a way of ridding themselves from that feeling. And that's called identifying with the aggressor. And in some ways, as you're talking there, I'm listening to how this has made you feel. So, and not just you, but everyone really, most people who've watched that documentary have been left feeling confused, shocked, disgusted, unsure of how they feel about it. And doesn't that sound to you like how a young person having inappropriate sexual contact would feel?
Absolutely, and you feel it somatically, don't you? When we're all of us, if you look at anyone that talks about her or people like her, you can see it in their faces. There's that furrowed brow, and you can almost see the sort of the chest area. It's almost like a grief, and I don't know if that grief is their own grief, as in, uh, 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 because they're confused and they've lost a sense of what normal is, because that's been shifted massively recently. But also, I feel so sorry for her.
It's Bonnie's grief, isn't it? I think that's
Yeah,
with it. She is, in a way, she is making us all feel perhaps how she projective identification is where you communicate, or the patient or the person is communicating unconsciously what they're feeling because they can't articulate it in words or they haven't processed it yet. And it's almost as if that's what's going on here, that sort of shift of how we're all being made to feel by having to watch, by her making this all public. Are we having to feel how she's feeling or how she has previously felt, but that part of her is split and detached off? And
yeah,
that's what's, in a way, I felt like this about Baby Reindeer. Okay, when that was on Netflix.
me too.
I feel like that was this projective identification from the actor who
Yeah,
has publicly spoken about all of this now. But obviously, he went through it was true story of it went horribly wrong in many ways, didn't it? But
yeah,
in a way, it felt like the shock of that and the dysfunction of that, I think speaks to the shock and dysfunction that he would have felt going through that experience when he was, being sexually assaulted, being drugged, being raped. So it's almost a similar kind of, similar sort of process to that here, and it's so extreme, and like you say, it's so public.
yeah,
How we look at how public this is, but all of the she's pushing boundaries, right? Not in a good way. And no one's pushing back on those boundaries. Even Channel 4 and the production company who made that didn't push those boundaries back and say, actually, we've all boundaries have been pushed here. And that is really what, when people are dealing with trauma and it's unconscious, it plays out in the therapy room. They push boundaries, they push you as the therapist. You end up doing things you shouldn't have done. You run over in time, you say things say things out of turn perhaps. But there are things that, happen when you're dealing with someone who's got unprocessed trauma, and it looks almost like that, doesn't it? That is this is there trauma there, that even just the fact that we don't even have to um conjecturize here. I mean, she has said that she had sex at 13 and she was having sex at 13 is what she said. That is inappropriate sexual contact.
yeah.
Psychosexually ready for that. So even if we just took that alone, and we don't know what that experience looked like at all, but is that, how we're all feeling when we watch this, is that how this little girl felt when she was 13 years old going through that potentially? And is that what's led to these behaviors? And it's the extreme of it, but it's, this pushing of the boundaries, Channel 4 pushing the boundaries, putting all of this content in, putting this all onto a, mainstream platform for people to access. Boundaries just seem to have, from what I can see across the board on this, the parents' boundaries, the filmmakers' boundaries, the channel's boundaries have just gone out of the window everywhere. Uh,
Which is reflective clearly for so many people growing up in a situation where they perhaps are having sex very young, whether they feel like that's a chosen thing or not. Where is the system protecting you? Where are the, I'm
well,
not blaming teachers.
their boundaries have been violated at an age
Yeah.
where we can't cope with it, and that's what then happens, is that the boundaries have been blurred, and then you no longer know where boundaries lie, and it's almost like Bonnie Blue's alter ego. This has got the alter ego of Bonnie Blue has gone to these extremes, um, so extreme. Where does this boundary actually end, and what does it really mean for her about this almost like boundaryless world that she's found herself in?
Well, I guess one of the things you said there about just to come back to the idea of what paedophilia is, why it might happen, and all those things. I've always said that when you're a victim, certainly for people that are sexually abused as children, when you're the victim, if like you say that becomes an exiled part that you can't deal with and you bury it, then it's a bit like, well, if I become the predator, I'm no longer the victim. So again, I'm going to inflict that onto someone else. But it's not necessarily because I want to hurt that person. It's because I don't want to be the victim. And the only way I can feel powerful is to switch roles. So that leads me into the Bonnie Blue thing and the boundaries, because if there were no boundaries when she was a child, let's just say if there were no boundaries when she was a child, the education system weren't aware, so they didn't step in, the parental care perhaps wasn't what you and I would say would be a healthy parental care, perhaps there was other people around her that weren't noticing that something was different, then for her to put that, let's say, I don't want to call her the predator, but just for the purpose of the conversation, if you put the predator cloak on, so you're no longer the victim, then what you
But is
do
she not
is
the predator? Because is she not going after barely legal young boys who are going to university? So it's all
that's why I was careful what I said,
yeah,
because they're barely legal. So legally, uh, she's not considered to be the predator. I mean,
it's still predatory
psycho.
behavior though, isn't it? I mean, if a man
I,
was doing this
I
to
think,
women, if a
yeah,
man
I think it is.
if a man was doing this to lots of women, at a university, he'd be arrested. So
Yeah,
it is, and
yeah,
I think this is sort of why I brought up the pedophile example, just talking about that, because obviously we're not saying that she's a pedophile, but she does talk about liking barely legal. Now she does say in the documentary that some of this is about the what terms and language are, search are in the press, and what's going to work from a PR perspective. But is there something there about their first time and her first time? There's a link, isn't there?
absolutely. It feels like there must be. We don't know that for sure, but if we're guessing, the opinion would be that she's taking ownership of something where actually, although she might have felt like she enjoyed it at the time, and I'll give context to that. So when I was 13 and I was raped by a 20-year-old, I it was, looking back, clearly rape, but there was an element of me, and I'll be honest, where I felt chosen,
Yeah.
because it was a sense of, well, he's chosen me to do that to. So again, it's the identification with sex is all very wrong at that age. So although I know it was wrong and I wasn't comfortable with it, there was a part of me that felt chosen. So the reason I say that is that's a way of coping with what's happened. So if she's convinced herself that she liked it, and now because she talks about this as though she's doing them a service, like you say, oh, I'm going to make it so much easier. It's an offering. This is a kind offering to help you with your very first time, because I'm really, really helpful and I want you to see this as a beautiful experience. Well, then you are trying to, again, like you said, rectify the unconscious pain, I would say, but also with Channel 4 is specifically talking about boundaries. If there were no boundaries, then if you can take a massive broadcaster like Channel 4 and loosen those boundaries, we're back to normal. Everything's normal again because there's no boundaries. Even a massive broadcaster like Channel 4, no boundaries. That means it's normal and it's okay. So now I feel like it's normal and it's okay.
Yeah, repetition compulsion, just repeating patterns of behavior and over again. And
Yeah.
actually, and you've got broadcasters falling for it. I mean, there is an element of like looking at this from that analytical perspective, but then I think there is this element of saying there's something very cold and hard going on in terms of the fact that she talks quite openly in that documentary about um what and sorry, I just want to say as well, I think you've mentioned there about has there been more going on that we don't know, but even if there wasn't, and even if it is just what she told us about this experience at 13, it's almost like she's then become a victim of the society that she's in, where it's all about attention. It's all about what you look like online. It's all about trying to make money and putting yourself out there. Girls are sexualized from a young age. If
Yeah.
you're watching porn, then you're on Instagram, then you're on these platforms where it's actually really normal to be quite sexualized from a young age. That yeah, then you have this experience at 13. It's that very unfortunate set of circumstances that she's then found herself in, then potentially without those sort of safe boundaries around her to support her, even if it was this experience she's spoken about at 13. Um, but there is this element with these men of now she's got it in her head that she wants to make this content. It has to cut through. It has to be shocking. It needs to be 1,000 men in a day. No regard whatsoever of these young men, what if they're going to live to regret that. All these men being filmed in this documentary, and I'm thinking, what degree are you doing? What job are you going into? Have any of these people actually been assessed to even be in this documentary from a duty of care perspective? Who knows? Maybe they have. The young girls, let's say young girls because they were dressed up as schoolgirls, the young
Yes.
that all of them being in there, there's something very just cold of going, I want lots of money and lots of subscribers. And what I need to do to make that and to become famous, to everyone to know who I am, is to just effectively take advantage potentially of all these young people. Some of those girls, in my opinion, seemed quite vulnerable and ideally needed some appropriate adult around them to be saying, do you really want to go on camera? If you want to do something on OnlyFans, that's one thing, but putting it onto mainstream media is also it is another just another level of exposure that you can't take back. Once it's out, you can't take back.
I mean, do you remember? I mean, this conversation used to be about what you put on Facebook because your employers in the future could look into the fact that you went out and got a little bit drunk one night and perhaps didn't look particularly your best self. And we were told, be careful what you put on your Facebook, be careful what you put on your Instagram. I mean, if you're in a mainstream pornography video like this, I mean, okay, the world is changing in terms of employment, jobs, the way that we work. So I think this is the other problem with digitalization of everything, where you can basically, you don't have to work 9 to 5. You can carve a career out online, right? Even if it's not OnlyFans, it could be, I don't know, social media manager, whatever. So if you can work for yourself and everything is so accessible digitally, you can do whatever you want in your life because there's no comeback. There's no employer that goes, well, I don't want to employ you because I saw you in a very, naughty movie and you're not the type of person we want working at this organization. So I think now, because it's almost believed thoroughly that you can do whatever you want in life. You don't need to have a job. You don't need to worry about being employed. You don't have to sit in an office. You can work from home. Nobody ever needs to see your face. So if you choose to do this, there's no comeuppance for it. And actually, that's not true because in your life, when you meet your future husband or your future wife, if you have children, all of these things, you're not always going to feel cool about this. We know that because when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, I was an entirely different individual to what I am now. And this is you obviously don't know that at that age. I mean, the prefrontal cortex is 25 before it's fully developed. But so, in your early 20s and in your late teens, when you are legal, by the way, there is no worry about when you're 45, when you're 50. And There's another thing here which comes slightly away from that. I had this conversation with someone the other day, actually. I think I must have said I was doing this with you. And he said, is it even real? Because he's got a massive social media presence, right? A huge one. You would call him infamous, okay? And he was saying, why are there no leaked videos of some of the things that she says she's done? So yes, there's this documentary, but how do we actually know there was over 1,000 people? You know, how can we see? I mean, I dare say you'd have to watch for many, many hours, 24 hours, to know that there was definitely that many people. Who's fact checking this? Now, I'm only saying that because there's no doubt that what she's doing is, even if it's not over 1,000 people, morally incorrect and physiologically damaging, I would imagine. But there is that element to it as well. Like, how much of this is actually true, and how much of it is PR, and how much of it is just made up? So
I think we'd all like it to not be true. So I think there's an element of comfort for us to question whether it's real or not. But I would say that if Channel 4 have done a TV show where they called it A Thousand Men and Me, that I would say I would hope they would have checked that that's actually factual, what they're putting out. Who knows?
but don't they only have to ask her if that, because obviously you would have to check with the thousand. I think it was like 1,059 or something like that altogether, wasn't it? If I might be wrong on that.
That's
Again, do not quote me.
57 it was, I think it was.
57.
Yeah.
So wouldn't they have to ask 1,057 people that were involved in that documentary?
So I think what happened is that all of these men had to sign consent forms for for this video to be uploaded to OnlyFans. Then OnlyFans said that the content was too extreme and they didn't want to upload it to their platform. They were losing advertisers like Visa and some other high profile advertisers over it. So then she wanted to upload this footage to another platform, but unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but she couldn't upload that to another platform because the consent forms had all been signed for OnlyFans to go onto OnlyFans only. So she's done
Right.
this stunt, but I was saying this to someone the other day. I said, "Well, she's got what she wants. She's got the PR and the publicity without this actually going out anyway." So
Yeah. Now, is it true that her mum was with her on the day, helping her on the day?
allegedly, her mum was yeah, allegedly her mum was her mum made the sign of, "Bunk me and let me film it," that she took to this freshers' fair. So her mum was helping her to recruit these young men. If I had a son and I thought he was losing his virginity like that, I'd be furious. I'd be furious. I would. You don't want that for your child, do you?
Never.
Be filmed and with someone who's sleeping with another 100 and about sorry 1,056 other people on that same day. You don't want that for your brother, your friend, your son. You just don't want it. So yeah, but the mum was yeah, the mother is involved in it, and who knows whether mum has to lean into this because that's her only way of coping with it herself is by justifying it in the documentaries that she says something along the lines of, if you were getting paid 500,000 to £1 million a month, you would get your bits out too. I think that's what she said, and
Not me.
no, exactly so, not me. Uh, but I think, it is that, her process of actually, you know, maybe I have to change my morals and beliefs and what I would have, because she said in the documentary something like, is this what I would have wanted for her? No, but I wouldn't want her doing anything else now. And I thought, that's just a bit strong. It may be that the cameras were on her and she was under pressure and she said something she shouldn't have done. But, there's one thing sort of going, you're doing it, I don't like it, but you're my daughter and I love you no matter what. There's something different to that, to going, well, I wouldn't have you doing anything else. So yeah, the mum is involved she in a way she's complicit because if you don't have a voice around you telling you it isn't right, you are going to regret it. I don't agree with it. What's going to then happen in 20 years' time when she doesn't agree with it and she looks back and says, why didn't you say no? Why
Exactly.
didn't you protect me?
Exactly, because that's an injury. Like, you look, I mean, again, she's in her early mid-20s. When she gets to her mid-40s and perhaps has her own children, if this happens, that awareness that your mum enabled it
Yeah.
and didn't step in and say, "What the heck do you think you are doing? This is not happening. Not over my dead body am I letting you do this. I don't care how much you're getting paid." Money's You teach your children the value of protecting themselves, of loving themselves, of connection, of going out there, and I'm not saying Bonnie Blue doesn't work hard. I don't know what goes on in the background, but I mean, I certainly wouldn't be putting that down as a career option for my child.
And you teach your children that that they are valued, and that
Yes.
value comes from having respect and dignity and
And yeah,
integrity, not from how much money you make a month. You know, that is an external factor in anyone's life, but is it worth compromising your self-respect and your dignity for that money? And you know, that ideally, you'd be teaching your children no amount of money is worth um, degrading yourself like that.
it isn't. I mean, I've actually seen videos, and she is degrading herself because I've seen videos of her going into various different places, and a young man is serving her, say in a fast food joint or something, and she's kind of like, "You know who I am, don't you?" And he's kind of like, "No." And she's sort of giggling and flirting and sort of, expecting this lustful young man. And he's kind of like, I don't know who you are, don't care. And you can sort of see that talking about the detachment, it doesn't seem to bother her. Like if I went in to anywhere, which I would never do, but let's just say I go somewhere, go, "You know who I am, don't you?" And they're like, "Absolutely not." I would go, "Oh, I'm really embarrassed," and leave. I wouldn't keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
So there's clearly no obvious connection to shame. So if you're looking at her behavior generally, it's not only the clear shock and disgust value, it's that there's no shame and she doesn't read the other person.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, as we say, we've got to be careful what we say, but I think it is interesting that, yeah, there's just something very switched off, isn't there?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, very, and it's switched off, but also insatiable at the same time. And you think, what do you want? You know, what is your objective? What's your end goal? Because whatever you're aiming for, you know, you want to be earning £1 million a month. Okay, then what? And what are you going to do with that money? And you know, you can't leave your house. You have death threats. This is what she says. I mean, I'm not sure she has meaningful relationships around her, but then what? You know, it's what is this end goal? And I wonder, you mentioned about she doesn't seem to have any shame. I wonder if the shame is just that overwhelming. It's been completely, you know, psychologically, unconsciously
Yeah.
split off. It's like
Yep. Yep.
that hard to deal with is split off, no longer feel it, notice it, see it, and anybody else don't care. It's almost like that's happened. But there are some people who have to go to extremes with their behaviors because they don't have the same realm of feeling that the rest of us do. So they don't have the same level of emotional intelligence, emotional expression, they don't feel the same. So actually, it
Mm.
takes much more extreme behaviors to feel what you and I may feel, you know, quite easily. So, you know, you do wonder what is it? Is it that there's trauma? This is what I mean about the combination of factors. Is it that there's trauma? Is this that you had a predisposition anyway as a person? Is it that you're then in this environment and the society that we now live in where you've seen porn at a young age, you become sexualized? OnlyFans has become huge. You've gone on that. Your ex-husband also encourages you to do it. So you haven't even got, imagine your ex, I don't, you know, I haven't had many partners that would have been happy with knowing I had any relationship with any other man, you know. So most partners don't want you having had relationships, or they certainly don't want to know about it. So all around her, and whether that's by design, where she's
Yeah.
chosen to pull in a unit around her of people. The person who works for her, oh, I think it's great. It's wonderful what she's doing. Then you've got the ex-husband. Oh, yeah, it's amazing. She's a pioneer for the porn world. And, you know, so you've got people coming in with these ideas, but also these, again, the boundaries. You know, you think a partner or an ex-partner well, are they an ex or are they still in your life? Why are they so close in your life? Why are they what is it that they're getting out of you doing this, and why are they supporting that? Even, even that seems unusual, doesn't it, if you look at relationships
Very.
you'd expect?
Well, it's what I was saying about the Channel 4 thing as well. It's like you mentioned by design there, and it's if everybody agrees with me, then this is normal. And I don't have to look within at all because there's nothing wrong with me. Everybody, Channel 4, my mother, my ex-husband, my PA, these men that are lining up, these women that are putting the school uniforms on. Everybody's having fun. So it's normal, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Nothing to see here except for I want your attention and I want your validation. And if I don't get it and I don't get the money, then I'm not okay. But it's interesting you say, because you mentioned repetition compulsion earlier. And I wonder if you've created a life where you've got so much money, but you're not able to actually experience life. Okay. So it's not normal. If you can't go out because you're getting death threats, if the only way that you converse with people or connect to people is through sex, that's not a life.
Mm.
That's not the well, for me anyway. That's not a full experience of life, connection, freedom, privacy, all those things that I really truly value. And I think most people do. This is why the digital world is such a problem at the minute because it affects our privacy, it affects our freedom, all those different things that we all talk about. And it's very topical. Well, she's taken all of that away from herself. So that's obviously um, disturbing. But could that be repetition compulsion? If you've never felt free, happy, I'm not saying this is her, but I'm saying if, um, then to create a life where you haven't got any of those things, it is normal. And again, you don't know, my normal is different to your normal. And, every individual has a different familiar circuitry running through their fascia, their cells, their brain, their body. So our familiar is different. So do we just all, in unconscious ways, create a very familiar experience? And
I think we
could
do.
that be what she's doing?
I think that's pretty much what we all do. I think we've got the blueprint, which is very unconscious, and it's from our early years, and then we go on to, if we're not consciously aware of that environment, we go on to choose those same relational dynamics throughout the rest of our lives. I mean, that's what
Mhm.
we tend to do because it feels
Mm.
normal. And sometimes that can be healthy. If you've had a nice, happy, healthy, well-rounded, balanced childhood, great. You're more likely to choose partners that echo that for you in adulthood, and friends, etc. But if you didn't have that, then you are going to also have that same toxicity in your adult life, and that's that without processing, without therapy, that's what you'll do. It is quite possible that she'll do it, but I think that with her, she's just one of many. I mean, she's the most extreme, but there are lots
Yes.
of these young women who are now doing this, and also one's not new. Neither is group sex. I mean, it's been around for centuries, people
Oh, yeah.
having gangs, really. So
Yeah.
it isn't new, but what's new is the fact that it's crossed into the mainstream. It's now gone from something that people were watching on videos or looking at in magazines to accessing online to now on Channel 4. It's a
Yeah.
step further for me. I feel that they covered. There was one thing doing that documentary on her, and I think it would have been much more useful to look at what she represents in society right now in terms of access to pornography, in terms of young people engaging in sexual behaviors at a much younger age, the impact that has, pe- people choosing to engage in sex work rather than to go into other jobs, the power of the internet, access to pornography. I think we could have looked at it. It could have been looked at in a much more interesting way, I think. Or even she could have been, she could have had more deeper discussions than what was had there, because it just seemed to be a video about what she was doing, which just seemed really odd for Channel 4 to me. I just thought
It's just voyeuristic.
it was, and it also I felt I had to go for a walk afterwards because I just felt so sad at what the world is coming to, and I sound like such an old fogey saying that.
No, you don't.
But it just felt, especially with a 12-year-old daughter, I just thought, so you're telling me that you were watching porn at the same age that my daughter is, and that you were having sex in, like, really, I can't imagine that. And I just, And then you think about what women, it wasn't because it wasn't just her, there was all these 1,057 men, the people working for it, the commissioners at Channel 4, the people who made this documentary. I wonder whether she went through any duty of care process for this to even be signed off. Obviously, you know that I did duty of care in TED
Yes.
for some time. And then you look at these other girls that have been brought in into this documentary who all want to be in a film with her because it'll help their popularity. And you think, oh my word, is this what we've come to, where we are now? This is what we're striving for, is to do something like this rather than thinking about our value and our positive impact that we could have on the world. What do we want to learn? Who do we want to be? Who do we want to become? What do we want to succeed in life? Young people aren't thinking like that. I know that's generalization. It's a sweeping statement, and not every young person is like that. But when I saw that documentary, which really highlighted that, it did it. I felt really sad, and I thought, what are we coming to? Why are we platforming someone like that, and why aren't we giving someone who there are better role models out there for young people? That
So many.
they're the people that we want to be platforming, but instead it's this kind of crap, to be quite honest, that
Yeah.
gets a documentary produced on it because it's shocking. You know,
And disgusting.
yeah. I just honestly, I thought the whole thing was I just thought it was done in a really odd way, and I didn't think it was a good choice of resources, especially in telly, where there's not huge amounts of money in it at the moment. Not a lot's been commissioned. Why commission that? Why don't they commission a documentary on something that's actually helpful or useful? Because we didn't really cover the fact that, do you realize that your young children? I mean, they did, they did mention. The documentary maker did mention about the child, their daughters watching it, and they felt uncomfortable, but we aren't mentioning the fact that young girls are going to be looking up to her, much like young boys are looking up to Andrew Tate. What kind
Yeah.
of society are we creating when her behavior is fine when it's on social media and there's no control over it, because we can try and control what our children are watching in some ways is not easy. But in the same month that the Online Safety Act is trying to put regulations on people watching pornography, the same month that we saw an 1,800% increase in VPNs being downloaded, so that adults and whoever else, young people, can go watch porn without having to put verification details into the internet. So the same month we're seeing that, we then see on mainstream TV a whole documentary with coverage of extreme group sex going on, just flicking through your channels 1 to 5. It's just there. And I just found it all odd. It's all where
It's really strange, and it makes you question, without going too off the Richter scale here, makes you question who's making the decisions here and why are those decisions being made? Because when you look at some of the theories around some of the biggest organizations, you have to question who's signing that off and why. I mean, financially. Look, we're talking about it now. Before I go off on that tangent, because that's a tangent that, let's face it, I think there are predators at every level in every system. So it does make me wonder what's happening there. But the other side to this coin is that we are having this conversation. We are two mothers, and I believe I'm a mother that cares. I don't want to say a good mother, but I feel like I try my best to be a good mother. I'm not saying I get it right. We said this on the other episode. I won't go down there
nobody
again.
gets
But
it right all the time. My word, it's not about getting it right. It's just about knowing when you got it wrong.
correct. That's a very good point. And I do think that I've got that nailed, the knowing when I got it wrong bit. But equally, you're a good parent. So we're having this discussion, which will be heard by people. And those people will agree with what we're saying. They may not, on the whole, I would imagine most people will agree with what we're saying. There'll be some people that think, oh, I'll just leave people do it. It's the oldest profession in the, there'll be that as well. But it reminds me of that kind of Carl Jung thing where he talks about the shadow. And when something really horrible in your life happens, a relationship comes to an end, you lose a job, someone really close to you dies, and there's two ways of looking at it. Poor me, bad luck. This is my life. I'm always the unlucky one. Or this is a point of transformation. This is where I get to collapse and rebuild. I'm stepping out of the old identity and I'm becoming conscious of what I can become. This is breaking me down so that, again, it's the metamorphosis thing, isn't it? So I can become the butterfly. And I do wonder if, whilst there might be predators at every level running these systems, society and communities, we are having these conversations. And I do wonder whether there's a point in time where there's this transformation again, where people like you and me are going, we need to make sure we're having these conversations with our kids. We need to be in touch with our children's teachers, with their schools. We need to be putting that effort in. We need to make sure that we're talking to the local church or whoever it is that's in our area that is involved in the community. We need to make sure that when my daughter or when my son is going to his friend's house, I know their parents. And I think some of that is starting to happen. And I think COVID was really the beginning of a big shift there. Again, you could argue, conspiracies, whatever, but there's also the point that communities did come together. And whilst this is horrific and I think it's disgusting and shocking and all of those things, I actually do think that there could be some transformation in this, is that we could see, it's what we spoke about with the digital stuff. How do we change this? How do we make sure that the girls that are starting to idolize someone like Bonnie Blue systemically and in a village, how do we make sure those girls are seen? Because I feel I want to do more to protect young girls and boys. I feel I want to do more, and I know you are, because you're always in schools and you're doing a lot of work with your drama school and your talent and all of that. So I know you're having direct contact to young people, but I think that's the wider conversation as well. What can we do to stop Bonnie Blue and the likes being the idol?
Well, I think Channel 4 could have helped by not platforming her, because
Yeah.
that didn't need to happen. But it's a I'd heard of her before, but I hadn't really paid any attention because
See, I had, and I'd been really watching her quite closely because I was so disturbed by what I was seeing.
yeah, you see, I hadn't really paid that much attention, but then when I watched the documentary, I found that really disturbing, which has then
Yeah.
obviously made me think, "What on earth is going on here?" on every level. Um, so maybe it has been a good thing in terms of that it's made me think a bit more about it. The thing with, this kind of material is the last thing a young child's going to do is tell us they've watched that. We're not going to know about it. If they've seen it online, we aren't going to know about it. And this is the thing with the devices. It comes back to the devices. It comes back to the book Generation Zombie, is that we don't know the worst things that are going on these devices. Our kids are not going to want to tell us because
Yeah.
they'll fear how we'll react. They'll know that it's not right and they'll feel they want to keep it from us. That's natural. We can minimize the risk by making sure they're not on the devices in their bedrooms. This is why I say just, if they're going to use devices, make sure it's downstairs, make sure you're around, you know what you're doing. Normalize an environment where children feel they can come to you and that it isn't, it's not, they haven't done anything wrong. It's not them. They didn't do anything wrong. They're children. If something bad has happened, it's not their fault. It's
Mm.
normalizing that kind of conversation and reaction to anything that they tell you and creating that safe space to talk. But I do think it's quite difficult because actually in schools you've got children having access to social media. Even if your child doesn't, which mine doesn't, obviously, she still has friends who go on social media. So, that I haven't heard anything as extreme as porn with them yet, but certainly she's got friends who are all over skincare stuff. So then, it filters through
They're mad for it, aren't they?
in the playground then, doesn't it? Even if your
Yeah.
daughter's not on socials, just because her friends are, she's gets picking up that way. So you've got to, really until schools are banning devices, which some are, and they are hopefully regulating how much access they have on their school computers, which some schools do and some schools don't. And then we have to regulate how much time they have on these devices at home until they're mature enough to cope with accidentally stumbling across porn on the internet.
Mm.
That's what, either intentionally or accidentally, we need to wait till they're mature enough because even witnessing porn can be experienced as traumatic if you're not mature enough, which children aren't mature enough to be witnessing that kind of porn that she's getting
No,
into. Um, so I think we're in a difficult position as parents at the moment. We
very.
we either monitor the device use, we can't monitor what's going on online. There is the Online Safety Act, but then as we saw, people are just people finding a way around it. So
And kids are so clever. If they want to find a way around it, they will. By the way, kids are great at hiding things. So, like you say, even if you think you're monitoring what they're doing, they will find a way to make that we will never guess. Certainly, you and I, to find a way of hiding what they're doing. So, I always think truth is king, and I think bringing the subject to your children rather than waiting for them to bring it to you. Sometimes, not always. It's got to be age appropriate. But I've done that with Lila. I've said to her, what do you think to this Bonnie Blue? She goes, oh, I can't stand her. That's her first reaction. We'd never spoken about her before. Obviously, Lila is a bit older. She's 17, nearly 18. But her initial reaction was, can't stand her. I cannot stand her, immediately. So what was good about that is that she'd formed that opinion by herself. I hadn't had to have any conversation with her. But what I certainly have always done, and I remember, gosh, she was probably in about 3 or 4. Maybe she was a bit older. It might have been at primary school. I remember one of the parents saying to me, "How do you start talking to your children about sex?" I said, "I just say it. I just, say, how do you feel about talking about things that, you might have heard in the school playground?" Because you've got to remember, and you'll know this, that uh, if your child is, say, 6, they might be friends with someone who's got an older brother who's 12, so, or an older sister that's 12, and they might have an even older one that's like 15, 16. So the young child that's 6 or 7 is hearing their siblings talk about things that then gets filtered down into the playground, as you were saying, with skincare and so on. So sometimes, I remember asking her, "Oh, have you ever heard anything that you're uncomfortable with? Have you ever heard the word sex?" Just really gently going into the conversation without sort of being too descriptive. And some people are a bit like, "Oh, I don't think I can do that yet." I knew the way that things were going with social media then, that you kind of had to do that in a safe way. And that's the key word, isn't it? And I think so many people go, "Yeah, but how far can I take that conversation?" And I think it's just about asking questions and not being afraid to use certain words, because we kind of have to. You can't, the birds and the bees is fine, but they also need to know what is the birds and the bees. You've got to be able to be brave enough to have those conversations. And I think even us just having this conversation now, there'll be parents out there that will go, I'm not ready to do that with my children yet. And that's okay too. But it is about conversation in the home.
I mean, we've got to be realistic. Children will know what sex is at a young age because
Yeah.
TV's sexualized.
Yeah.
If you're just watching a Netflix show, it's all over it. So
Yeah.
yes, children shouldn't be watching certain things on Netflix shows, but unless you are keeping to all of the age restrictions and limits, not allowing your child on social media, not allowing them to have a device, and even then, because everybody else has it, I mean, the age restrictions on films are just silly now, really, because children are accessing so content that's far worse online. You can't protect kids from that. So they do learn about it. And it's about how you frame it and how you talk about it. Like you say, I mean, it happened in our house. I mean, my daughter ended up seeing something that I'd been watching on Netflix during the lockdown, and she's walked in, and it was just something like, I think it was called Friends from College, and in it there's a sex scene in it. And she walked in the room and I went, "Oh, no, 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 just can't come in right now." So I said, just go out. So I was looking for the remote to try and pause it. She's playing in the kitchen. Anyway, the next day, she'd obviously got up early, gone downstairs and put this on and watched it. So she didn't tell me then. Next night we were watching something called Unorthodox, and it was about I think it was about a girl who'd basically just had a big change of life. She was raised in quite a religious family and then left and moved somewhere else. It was not, again, on Netflix. And she, in it, there's a sex scene in it, but it's, they're both kind of fully clothed. It's not very sexual. And Lil was in the room with me, and I said, "Oh, you know, co- covered her eyes up and everything." And she went, "What? Why?" And I said, "No, it's just something you can't see." And she went, "Why? Are they having sex?" And I said, "Are they what?" Honestly. And she just went, "Are they having sex?" And I said, "What's that?" And she went, "Don't you know?"
Brilliant.
"No." I said, "What is it?" And she just said, "Well, it's when a man and a woman take their clothes off and rub their bodies on each other." And I just said, "How do you know that?" And she said, "Well, you know that thing you were watching the other day?" She said, "Well, I came downstairs and I put it on Netflix so I could see what it was." So she just went on and watched that on there, and then obviously had heard the language around it. And even doing what I do with all the controls that I have on things, it just happens,
It
and
does, yeah.
they do this sort of thing. So you have then obviously the conversation started. Oh, what is that? Well, that's actually how you'd make a baby. And because she'd always had questions of things like, how did I come out of your tummy? Did they cut you to get me out? So they have those sorts of questions. And then naturally, so but I think it's being honest, isn't it? It's sort of, well,
Yeah,
that's how people make a baby. Um,
yeah,
and this is how people come into the world. And then the questions come from there and you answer them in an age appropriate way. Obviously, she hadn't seen what sex really was. She'd seen what this version of it was on this TV show of people rubbing their bodies on each other, not what the actual anatomical.
reminds me of the In-Betweeners clip. You know, when have you seen that one where he has, I can't remember the name he was now, the one with the glasses in the In-Betweeners, where he has his first experience and it basically is that. It's what they think sex is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, so it was innocent, but kids are going to be seeing this stuff, and I was glad that she felt she could just tell me openly, talk to me about that.
Yeah,
There wasn't going to be any, "I can't believe you went on that channel and watched that." None of that. It was just a conversation. She knew she went on, she watched it, she told me about it. It was all very plain, which is no non-emotive in terms of no one was upset or angry about it. It was just having conversations about it after that point. And I think that's the space that we have to create for our kids. I mean, I worry about the level of stuff that they're going to see online, because that sort of stuff with Bonnie Blue, I think was, previously would have been, you'd be searching for that in some sort of engine, it was a search engine, wouldn't you? It wouldn't have been coming across that on Channel 4.
no,
If it's become that normalized, we've become so desensitized to sex. That's what's happened to us collectively as a society, is that we're all desensitized to sex, so much so that we can put group extreme sex games on to Channel 4 for all to see and not even bat an eyelid about it. I mean, say not bat an eyelid, I think people do have questions about it, and I'm not prude. I'm absolutely not a prude.
no,
But I think it's, for me, the most interesting thing is just looking at this as how have we become, and it's obviously part of the work that I do is looking at how we've become so desensitized to sex. How is this leading to sexual dysfunction? How is this leading to dissatisfaction in relationships? How is this fracturing our society even more? And how is this leading to sexual assault? That we're seeing
yeah.
rising numbers of sexual assault in society. Why is this happening? And and access to porn is a big part of that.
And I think one of the things that, that springs to mind here is we spoke about all the boundaries and we spoke about the normalization of all of this stuff. But as you said in our last episode, it's therefore it's normalizing other things too, because if you're addicted to watching that kind of content, you're probably in your bedroom on your phone, not opening your curtains. You're on your game station. Does I sound 100 years old or not? Is it a game station? I don't know what they're called.
Yeah, games console. I know what you mean.
um, but you're probably not leaving the house. You're not getting the exercise. You're not eating very well, if at all. And when you do eat, it's fast food. The ecosystem around this, it's the breaking down of society, isn't it? And that's why I questioned why someone like the broadcaster Channel 4 would allow this. Is there an underlying feeling that they are, I say they, is there a trying to break us down? What is going on really?
I honestly just think that it takes, they want ratings. That's what they care about. Ironically, lots of their advertisers said they don't want to be
It
involved.
was exactly that. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
But that's how they make money. They have the ratings, they can then charge more for advertising. Yeah, so they want the ratings, and it takes such extreme behaviors to shock now. So a
yeah,
documentary about maybe looking at this through a slightly different lens probably wouldn't bring the viewers in. And maybe that's why they've had to go down this route of, and the thing is, they covered a story which is shocking. So they haven't sensationalized it. I mean, it already is shocking that she was doing this. They just didn't need to give a platform to it, I think. I don't think
Correct.
that's what I think is the issue. But and I don't think they covered why it's problematic enough, the impact that it's actually having. This was, like you say, more voyeuristic. That's what it was, more so
Definitely.
than anything.
And it's what it brings us full circle, really, because it's what I was saying at the beginning. I've never, I mean, again, I probably could have reached out to Bonnie Blue's people and organised for her to come on the podcast. She'll do quite a lot of podcasts, won't she? And I just sort of thought, no, I don't want to give her the platform. I don't mind talking about this in a way where we're dissecting it and we're layering in some of the psychoanalytical terms and looking at the breakdown of society potentially and what we can do about it and how we can see it as a moment of transformation to step up and do something in our communities as parents, as adults looking after young people. um I don't mind doing that because I think the conversation needs to be had. It's not us choosing to put that material out there. It's out there whether we like it or not. But I think there is an ethical uh, issue here overall, and if this is the beginning, is this the beginning of the end? That's
It feels like that to me. I just feel like humanity and the way that we're going is just we're destroying the planet. We're destroying each other. We are disconnecting from each other. We're becoming lonely and isolated. You don't even really need to watch real porn anymore. You can watch AI. You have
yeah,
a relationship with your AI chatbot. I mean, Elon Musk launched the AI girlfriend, which was available for people aged 12 years and up, and they can undress this AI girlfriend. So you're forming, we're just fracturing as society, becoming like disconnected at home, getting our sexual gratification from porn and watching it. It won't be long before there don't need to be real people like Bonnie Blue actually having sex, because AI will be doing it anyway. It already is, isn't it? So AI will be making God knows whatever porn that you want it to do. It definitely feels like we're just heading into really just awful times where it's sort of like, what does it mean to be human? What is that question? What does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be successful now? Is it about your place in your community? Is it about the people that you have around you and how many friends and the relationships that you have around you? Is it that you have a healthy, balanced life? Or is it that you will just give anything, give all of your morals, your dignity, your self-respect away, as long as you've got money and as long as you're Instagram famous and as long as you're all over TikTok? Is that where we've got to in society, where this seems to be what young people do aspire to, is that they want to be on social media and they want this big brand and they want this massive following, and it's all just so fake and void and empty. I find all of it. Obviously I have to be on Instagram because of written my book and my publishers want me on there, but
yeah,
I wasn't really on it before. I don't want to do everything I do to do it so that I can then take a photo and put it on Instagram. I don't want to become defined. I don't want my actions and motivations to be defined by the images that I could then take of it to put onto social platforms, which is what happens when you spend too much time on platforms. Is you no longer do things for you and how it makes you feel and what you're getting out of it. You do it because of, what are people going to think of it when I put it on social media? Is this going to
yeah,
be good? And I don't want to get to that point where I'm so detached from who I am and what I want. And it's sad. I feel that that's the way that society's gone. Even Bonnie Blue's just a whole other level. She's not the only one. There's obviously another girl, Lily Phillips, who's doing I mean, she's doing another stunt, which I can only imagine it must be so dangerous for her to be doing what she's doing. And
it's so awful.
it is. And why?
It's so again, physiologically, we're talking about psychologically in society here, but physiologically, what these girls are doing to, I mean, like cervical cancer, the chances of getting cervical cancer go up the more sexual partners you have.
Yeah.
There you go. That's a well-known clinical statistic. So that's just one for you out of many that we could pull out of the bag. And I guess that's why this episode, I feel, which is unusual because everybody will know that I don't do online episodes, but I felt that this was important. It might be the first of a few more, actually, but I generally have stayed away from them. But it's only because I knew you already and our energy is already set from you being in the studio that I wanted to do this, really.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of want it to be a call to action. You know, we are, if we're not careful, as a society, going down a very, very dark path. And although, you know, this small little podcast can't change the world, I would like it to be a call to action to say, okay, we've spoken about the psychological damage, we've spoken about the physiological damage, we've talked about the demise of society and of the human experience. Well, even if it's only a few people that come together that say, let's have this conversation, let's educate, let's come together, let's put a watchful eye over our young people, let's try and work with them in some way, shape, or form. Whatever your skill is as an adult, pass it on to a young person, whether that's that you're a good listener or that you're good at crochet or you're good at building stuff.
Yeah.
Let's take it back to the basics.
Please, I'm so glad you said that. Like, please, can we have some role models with substance that
Yeah.
actually want to be good humans with good values that, and also that aren't just doing it so they can put it on social media? You know, because there's
Yeah.
a lot of people who claim to be doing that, but then they film it all and put it all on social media. And it's a little bit like, just taking all of the positivity out of that by filming you, I don't know, doing whatever you're doing that's supposed to be wonderful and then taking photos of it and selling it to the press or whatever. Just can we try and get some decent role models who our kids can look up to and say, yeah, I want to be like that person. I want to I want to do something fantastic with my life and my career. I want to help people. I want to do something that's actually going to be meaningful with my
Yeah.
time here on this planet whilst I'm alive, rather than, yeah, I want to go on social media and take photos. I mean, that's where we're going, isn't it? Like, where are these kids who actually I mean, I feel quite lucky in the moment with my daughter because she really wants to be a surgeon, so I'm sort of like, "Fantastic, let's stick on with that, that's great." And because she hasn't had that experience of social media yet, but I know that if she does, that it's all gonna start to become validated by the likes and the hearts and how many people watched the video, whatever else. And you don't want your child's validation to be externally located, which is what happens when we allow them online. But yeah, I think it's a great call to action. I think we just need people who are, like, say, go back to basics, learn some musical
Yeah.
instruments, learn to draw, get our kids to actually be good and have a talent where so they don't have to sell their soul and bodies to OnlyFans to make some money. And I know not all kids are doing this, but we have to look at, I think we have to look at, yes, Bonnie Blue is extreme right now, but if we look at the set of factors that led her to that, access to porn at a young age, that is common now because of devices and unregulated and unrestricted access. Sexual contact at a young age, that is also common, whether it's wanted or not, because sexual assault rates are going up. The peer on peer sexual assault rates are going up.
Yeah.
A world that is defined by attention, it's this attention economy. How many likes have I got? What's my brand? All this thing. Young kids talking like that. That's what Bonnie Blue grew up in, but that's what's also becoming normal for our teens. So we're looking at this set of factors, the desensitization of sex. That's normal. So that none of these things in isolation are abnormal anymore. They're normal that our young people now are all experiencing. So what are we going to end up with in however many years? You know, I don't know. I'm asking that question, but let's just, is it Bonnie Blue?
Well, it don't look good.
Yeah.
And this is what I did a session with a young man today. It was a beautiful session, and I won't go too much into it. But one of the things that he'd said after going through quite a significant amount of trauma, sexual trauma as it goes, was that he'd found that running was his thing. It really helped him, and he was really concerned that there was lots of men and boys out there that perhaps hadn't found a way of coping with what they'd gone through, and he started a running club.
Yeah.
And these guys were joining the running club. There was a couple of guys in there that had quite serious cocaine addictions and been, down some really awful paths. And they all found this running club to be a source of connection, community, but also feeling that sense of accomplishment. And so there are for all of us small ways, even if it's going for a run or a walk, even if, like I said, it goes back to things like, I mean, I can't sew to save my life, I've got the patience of a gnat, but those core skills. Because one of the things that I found when Lila was little was I used to just enjoy threading beaded jewelry. I'm not very good with stuff, hand eye coordination is terrible because, again, patience, but I enjoyed doing that because it was repetitive and it was almost meditative.
Mm.
So the reason I say these things is, one of the things that happened in COVID, which I think was brilliant, was these kitchen table businesses that began.
Yeah.
And again, it was okay. People did post it on social media because that was the only form of connection we had. But it's bringing people back round the kitchen table. It's that vibe, isn't it? It only needs to be a small group of you. If you can sew, invite your daughter's friends round and teach them how to sew. Have a few cakes on the table, bake some cakes, those kind of things. I know it sounds so simple. It feels like we've gone too far for that. But actually, if everyone did that, the pay it forward effect is huge.
Yeah, it's bringing it's community in real life again is what we need.
Yeah.
Actually, it was just as you were talking that made me think of an event I went to in the village that I'm from not so long ago. So this family own a house in the village, and they do strawberries and cream like every year. You can go and have a cup of.
Can I come?
Honestly, it's so gorgeous. It's a cute little Yorkshire village. And it's just lovely. And I like going back because I'm from there. So everyone will be like, oh, you're John's daughter, aren't you? So people know who my family are, and it is really nice. And I was talking to this woman who's from the village, who's in her 70s now, and the way that she spoke about who she was defined by her position in the community. So she said, "Oh yeah, so I run all of the so even though I'm from that village, obviously I don't live there now, so didn't know her." And she says, "Oh yes, so I do all of the I help with the church, and I always do little cake sales, once a month." And she was everything she spoke about who she was about what she did for that community.
Wow.
That's much more of a collectivist Eastern mindset.
Yes.
The Western mindset of the world is, much more individualistic and who am I and what did I achieve and what do I have? Whereas Eastern culture is much more collectivist and your place in that society. And I thought it was so lovely, but it was it wasn't an East-West divide. It was a generational divide. She's in her 70s. What made her proud was that she was part of this community, that people knew who she was, that she helped out with the church and she helped with the village hall and she does the cake sale. She does these different things. It really stood out to me because that's not things that, well, I don't really hear that anymore. People don't talk like that anymore. Maybe it's the world that I work in, but people aren't defined by the position that they have in their communities. Do people even feel that they have a real life community? I know people
Most people don't.
online communities, everything, the language that's used for the online world replicates, that is taken from the language that you use for our real worlds. So people look at those online communities, but how much depth is in these communities and how much connection is really there and how much satisfaction are we actually getting out of these online communities? I mean, I don't think we really, not on any meaningful level, we're
No.
not compared to, what we are real life community. So, it just stood out to me. And I think you're right. I think we do all need to, like I told you last time, I started doing this games night, try and do that once a month, just so that we have, I know when I say games, it's not, we were going to do poker, but, not everyone can play. So we end up playing some ridiculous card game, rummy or something. Um, but it's fun and we all have a laugh. We're not even, there's not even alcohol involved. We're just sat there, we're just laughing. Obviously, people can drink if they want, but most of us aren't that bothered about it. We just want to come together, have a good laugh. It's so much fun. But I've done that because I feel like it's so easy for everyone to drift and be so busy with their lives. We feel like we're connected because we're online, but no one's really connected in real person. And I think that's quite sad. So, yeah, I don't know. I think COVID has obviously pushed that wedge even further because
Yeah.
we saw we could do everything online. But at what cost is what I would argue.
And that's where I mean, again, I'm not trying to start a whole new conversation here, but because we could be here for, well, 48 hours talking about these things. But yeah, but I do think COVID to a degree has forced us into a situation where everything had to go online, and now we're so used to it. And of course, humans are very good at adapting, and if they adapt to the lazier way of doing things, then it's very, very hard to build yourself back. I mean, I say quite a lot at the minute. I stopped going to the gym a little while ago for various different reasons, and because I got out of the habit, getting back into the habit is so I'm going to do it, don't get me wrong, but it's so hard. So if we get lazier, to reestablish a routine is really hard. So that's why I say to people, microdose your community efforts. You don't have to go all guns blazing and make cakes for the local church just yet. I mean, you can move on to that, but maybe just make cakes for your next door neighbor. And even if it's crap, which inevitably mine are, it's the effort that's made and the conversation that's had. And it can be a running group. I'm just thinking, because I think so many of these conversations do end up down that very sort of like, what's happening to us all? I just feel really mindful that although we started with Bonnie Blue, it'd be great if we ended up with a whole load of people making fairy cakes as a result of this episode. It would be lovely, wouldn't it? Take it back to the old school. And I think that's what it's all about. I mean, you do get to a certain age, and you kind of realize that perhaps this is just what happens when you get older. You see that everything's wrong with the world because it's not the way it was when you grew up. But on a very important point, this isn't just that. This is much, much bigger than that. But I think if we go back to the old school, that we can actually find a lot of joy there. And just as a final note, really, Ozzy Osbourne, the legend, has obviously recently died. So I've been listening to a lot of the Black Sabbath music, and honestly, the production and the music that they made was absolutely incredible. And I said earlier, you can't AI that kind of music, that type of production, the studio sound that was created, the length of the songs and the stories behind them. You can't AI that, and you can't do that online. That came from, if you look at Ozzy Osbourne as a character, it came from a kid that wanted to do better. He put an advert in a shop. There was a little band formed, and magic happened.
Right.
And that's what happens when you learn your instrument or you get together around the kitchen table. Magic happens.
Yes.
And so he's a great loss, really, because he's one of the last people. We had David Bowie and Michael Jackson and all these different creators, but he's one of the last. And I think, if you've got a son or a daughter that doesn't want to make a cake, get them to play the electric guitar or the drums or something like that, because it is cool and it is magic, and we can all be a part of starting to create magic again. I really, truly believe that.
Yeah, that's a brilliant note to end on, because I think I can't even think of any great artists recently.
No.
I can't, that are just great artists, like they're fantastic musicians, songwriters, performers. Like, maybe am I out of touch? I don't know, but I can't. I did go and see Dua Lipa. She was fantastic, absolutely amazing. She electric. She really was brilliant. But I suppose in terms of bands, I can't think of any. Do we? Is
Well, bands have gone out of fashion.
Yeah,
We don't see bands in the charts anymore. Not really. We went through the phase of like Oasis and Blur and Cast. I mean, obviously Oasis are doing their reunion thing,
that's
but bands,
we all bands are coming back. Same with all the girl
yeah,
bands. Where are the new girl
yeah,
bands? Is that all the old
exactly,
went back? I just
yeah,
think that it takes a lot to be really good at something, doesn't it? It takes
yeah,
a lot to become an expert in something. It takes a lot to become a musician. It's a lot of practice and hard work. Takes me back to the devices. Where's the
yeah,
tenacity and where's the resilience? Where do
yeah,
you learn that you have to work hard? Yes, you have to fail. No, it doesn't feel good. Get back up and get on.
yeah,
Where are our kids learning that? And because to learn a musical instrument and be really good, yeah, you're going to get frustrated because it's going to sound awful at times. But if you want to be good at something, you do have to put all of that grit into it. It takes grit and tenacity. And I think if we haven't got those core skills in our kids, of course, we're going to end up with this like AI, superficial, fickle, awful society, because it's easier to do that than to work hard at something, like you say.
yeah, yeah.
Like, honestly, like you said, we could be talking for 48 hours about the situation, and I could say a lot about it, but Yeah, the answer is simple. We need to not be so merged with tech. So let's, yes, you as adults we can use it to our advantage for work and things, but other than that, let's down the tech, focus on the real world, help our kids to just focus on the real world, develop those skills, the skills of that, emotional um, resilience, the emotional intelligence, tenacity, all of that, but also the practical skills of, can you bake a cake? Can you play
Yeah.
a musical instrument? Can you draw? Can you do art? Can you go running? Can you do whatever? What are the things that you're really good at? And help them to get to a really good level at those, so that then they're bringing all of the skills that come with that through into the adult world. Otherwise, what are we going to have? Well, we're going to have what we've got now, which is Bonnie Blues and people who don't want to go to work. We're in it now.
And again, going back to that point, really as a final point, going back to that point as the Carl Jung thing is, maybe we need the collapse for the new world, for the transformation. And I think if we all go into the secondhand shops tomorrow, buy ourselves a little musical instrument. I shan't be doing it because it really would annoy everybody around me. But if we did that, or go and buy something secondhand, if that's all you've got, and do something with it. I mean, one of the things my friend used to do, Susie, her name was, she used to go and buy secondhand jackets and sew new buttons onto them.
Yeah.
There you go. There's an accomplishment. And I think we can all do something. It doesn't even need to cost money, but you can do something. And I think that's the point, really, is that one of the reasons I think this conversation is important is to bring it back to that.
Yeah, you can. I mean, I did a DeviceWise live event last week for foster carers and their children. And the purpose of the
Amazing.
event was to educate about devices and how problematic they are, help them create a device management plan, but also to introduce them to things that were cheap to do at home. So I introduced them to acting, I introduced them to singing, introduced them to Pilates, introduced meditation, and introduced them. I mean, I say introduce, some of them might already do these things before. Introduce them to arts and crafts, to just give them the saying, look, none of this is expensive, but this is a really good way. You don't need money to sing. Actually, you can just start singing at home. So we taught them some vocal exercises that, where they're not singing, but they're learning to use the voice, and to practice these things at home so that they can be doing something that doesn't involve being at a screen. So yeah, you're right. Let's take it back to basics, really.
Take it back to basics. And if all else fails, make a mud pie. That was my favourite thing when I was little, mud pies. And that really is, you don't need anything but an old tin and a spoon.
Or perfume. Did you? I used to make perfumes. Did you?
I loved it. I
Petals.
loved it, with some petals and a bit of water. It
Yes.
was amazing.
Yeah.
They're the things that make me smile.
Yeah.
They really are. Or make it, when you used to pick up dry leaves and get a bit of PVA glue and stick on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Great stuff. That is the fun stuff. Let's go back. But
Yeah.
do you know what? I would imagine that you and I might be a little regular on topical debates, because ultimately, your history, your background really allows us to explore these things past the salacious level and go into a much more educational level. So I hope that actually you become a regular on this channel, because I've thoroughly enjoyed the last two conversations, and it's at the end of both of them I felt a lot of hope, actually.
Good.
So yeah, I do, because I feel that although there is a lot to worry about, there is a lot we can do about it. And both conversations we've had, we've brought it back to the simple things. And I think repetition's recognition. So the more we talk about these things, the more people tune in. Perhaps eventually there'll be a little movement made.
Let's hope so. I think you're right.
Yeah,
We're getting to a point where there'll be a collapse and then we'll have to rebuild. And, I think
yeah,
people are already getting to that point where
sure.
they've had enough of what's
Yeah.
become of the online world. And now, with it not knowing if anything is real or authentic online, I think people are going to find that they're not going to enjoy it because it's not real. It's not real connection. You don't know what you're looking at. I think people will go, oh, boycott this. Don't like it. That's what I'm hoping.
I think that's true. It's why I mentioned the Black Sabbath thing, because as I was listening to it today, I was like, I miss this kind of level of just talent,
Alan.
skill. You just feel embraced by the music. You don't get that with tinny pop music. You just don't.
And it's inspiring, isn't it? Whenever I see
Yeah.
something like that, it makes me think, I want to get on a stage and do that. I'm probably not
Yeah,
on a stage,
yeah,
but it's inspiring. It gives me that fire where I think, wow, that's actually made me feel alive again. That
yeah,
I was so good at something that I'm looking at that going, wow, that is inspiring for me, hopefully inspiring for my daughter as well. What can you be
yeah,
in this world?
yeah. I agree, and I think, I feel, yeah, I do. I feel hopeful. I think there's lots we can do. So thank you again for this.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. No, like I said, I'm hoping it will be a regular thing.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, me too. Well, Charlotte, and everybody else, it is time for us to sign off and have a lovely, wholesome cup of tea, wrap ourselves in a blanket, and listen to some classical music. That is what I intend to do. But no, it's been a pleasure, and I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I have. On that note, we will sign off and say ta-ta for now.
Ta.
Bye-bye.